The first time it happened, Daniel thought it was a mistake, but by the third time his driveway was blocked, he knew it wasn't, and what happened next turned into the most unforgettable parking lesson the entire neighborhood had ever seen. Daniel Carter had lived in the quiet suburban street for nearly 8 years. His house sat at the corner of a cul-de-sac, with a wide driveway that curved gently toward his garage. It was simple, clean, and peaceful. At least it used to be. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel came home from grocery shopping and slowed his car in disbelief. A large silver SUV was parked directly across his driveway, not slightly blocking it, completely blocking it. Daniel sighed and stepped out of his car, hoping the driver was nearby. He knocked on a few doors, asked politely, and waited. Finally, a young couple from the house next door walked over casually. "Oh yeah, that's ours," the man said with a shrug. Daniel smiled politely. "Would you mind moving it so I can pull into my driveway?" The couple exchanged a quick look, then the woman laughed lightly. "We'll move it in a minute." Daniel waited. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed, the SUV never moved, and Daniel slowly realized something important. His driveway hadn't just been blocked, it had been claimed, and the neighbors clearly believed they could park there whenever they wanted. What Daniel decided to do next would turn their casual habit into a lesson they would never forget. The following week it happened again. Daniel turned into his street after work and immediately spotted the same silver SUV parked across his driveway. This time he didn't knock on doors, instead he parked along the curb and simply watched. The neighbors eventually came outside laughing, holding takeout bags. Daniel stepped out calmly. "Hey," he said politely. "Could you move your car?" The man barely looked at him. "We'll move it later." Daniel stayed calm. "I actually need to get into my driveway." The woman sighed dramatically. "It's just for a little while." That sentence echoed in Daniel's mind, just for a little while, but those little whiles had now happened 4 times. The SUV finally moved 20 minutes later. No apology, no concern, just a casual wave. Daniel pulled into his driveway slowly and sat there for a moment, because he realized something important. The neighbors didn't see his driveway as private space, they saw it as convenient parking. That night Daniel stood at the edge of the driveway looking toward the street. An idea slowly formed in his mind. Not angry, not aggressive, just clever. Because sometimes the best solution isn't arguing, sometimes the best solution is letting people experience the consequences of their choices, and Daniel had just thought of the perfect parking lesson. 2 days later the silver SUV returned, right on schedule. It rolled into the same spot across Daniel's driveway as if it belonged there. Daniel watched from his living room window quietly. The neighbors stepped out of the car and walked inside their house without even glancing toward Daniel's property. That was when he calmly picked up his phone, not to call the police, not to argue. Instead he made a very simple request. An hour later a small tow truck slowly rolled into the neighborhood. The driver stepped out and looked at Daniel. "That the one?" Daniel nodded. The SUV sat perfectly positioned across his driveway, blocking it completely. The driver checked the parking rules sign at the entrance of the street. Then he shrugged. "Well, it's definitely blocking access." The tow truck slowly backed up, metal hooks clicked into place, and within minutes the silver SUV was lifted gently off the pavement. Daniel watched quietly as the truck drove away. No yelling, no drama, just silence. But when the neighbors came outside later that evening and saw the empty curb where their SUV had been, the real drama was only just beginning. The shouting started almost immediately. Daniel heard the front door next door slam open. "Where's our car?" The neighbors stood in the street looking around in confusion. Then the man spotted Daniel standing near his mailbox. "Did you see what happened to our SUV?" Daniel nodded calmly. "Yes." The couple rushed toward him. "Well, what happened?" Daniel kept his voice polite. "It was towed." The woman's eyes widened. "Towed? Why would it be towed?" Daniel gestured gently toward his driveway. "It was blocking private access." For a moment the street went completely silent. The man's expression changed instantly. "You had our car towed?" Daniel didn't raise his voice. "I asked several times before." The woman looked furious. "You can't just do that." But Daniel simply pointed toward the curb again. "You can't block a driveway." Neighbors slowly began peeking out from their windows. The couple eventually stormed off to retrieve their vehicle from the towing company. But the story wasn't over, because the next day, they came back with a very different plan. The following afternoon Daniel returned home to find something unexpected. The silver SUV was back, but this time it wasn't blocking his driveway. It was parked inches away from the edge, technically legal, but clearly intentional. Daniel smiled slightly. The neighbors stood on their porch watching him, almost as if they were waiting for his reaction. Daniel simply parked his car inside the driveway and walked inside. No argument, no complaint, but later that evening a new sign. appeared near the driveway entrance. Simple, clear, private driveway, do not block. The neighbors noticed immediately, but what they didn't notice was something else Daniel had quietly arranged. A small camera mounted near the garage, not to spy, just to document. Because Daniel had learned something important: when people believe rules don't apply to them, evidence becomes very valuable, and within days, that camera would capture something that changed the situation completely. 3 nights later, the SUV returned again. This time it didn't stop near the driveway, it rolled directly across it, blocking it completely. Daniel watched the camera footage from inside his living room. The neighbors stepped out of the vehicle laughing, clearly confident, clearly believing nothing would happen again. Daniel calmly picked up his phone, but this time he didn't call the towing company. He called the city parking enforcement office. 20 minutes later, a small city vehicle arrived quietly. The officer reviewed the camera footage Daniel showed him, then he looked toward the SUV blocking the driveway. "Well," he said simply, "that's a clear violation." A bright orange parking ticket appeared on the windshield, and the officer made one more note in his report: repeat violation. The neighbors discovered the ticket later that night, and suddenly the parking lesson was becoming very expensive. But the real lesson hadn't even happened yet. The following week, something surprising happened. The silver SUV never returned to Daniel's driveway again. Instead, the neighbors parked properly in front of their own house, quietly, carefully. Daniel never mentioned the towing incident again, he never brought up the ticket, and he never argued, because the message had already been delivered. Sometimes respect for boundaries isn't learned through arguments. Sometimes it's learned through consequences. The neighborhood slowly returned to its peaceful routine. Kids played outside again, cars parked neatly along the curb, and Daniel's driveway remained exactly what it had always been, his. The neighbors still waved politely when they passed by, but they always made sure to leave the driveway completely clear, because one simple parking decision had turned into a lesson the entire street remembered. And sometimes the quietest responses are the ones people never forget, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.